What's going on, Canadian Dimension? My name is Matthew Green. I'm the very proud Member of Parliament, newly elected for Hamilton Centre. We are right in the heart of the hammer. You know, for anybody who's out there watching, when you travel anywhere in the world and you ask somebody where they're from, they say Toronto, Toronto. And you go, where are you really from? They're like, all right, man, Brampton, Oakville. If you come across somebody from Hamilton and you ask them where they're from, they're gonna say Hamilton. And if they don't, they lose their hood pass. Gone, erased, revoked. I think pharmacare is a fantastic example about the contrast between the liberal government under liberalism and the New Democratic Party under social democracy. Liberals will have you believe that they are pushing towards a universal pharmacare, but what they're not being honest to Canadians about is that their pharmacare system is predicated still on the pharmaceutical industry. It's predicated on a capitalistic, profit-driven model that will continue to artificially uplift the costs of critical medications for people at the expense of taxpayers. What we're proposing is in fact what their own experts and their expert panel and committee led by Dr. Eric Hoskins, who was a former provincial Liberal Minister of Health, is that it needs to be universally comprehensive and public so that the federal government has a role to play in decommodifying the pharmaceutical market to be able to provide critical medications to Canadians who rely on them. So recognizing the power of bulk purchasing, generics, being able to provide for people, a comprehensive and public plan. Under our current healthcare system, you could be diagnosed with an illness from a doctor in a free Medicare system, but then not have the coverage for your medicine, which makes no sense medically speaking. It makes no sense economically speaking, because we know when people can't treat their illnesses, they end up right back into acute care in the hospitals, which costs a tremendous amount more. How we can boast having a universal healthcare system that doesn't include pharmacare is absurd. What we're trying to paint for Canada is a compelling vision, a completion of the Tommy Douglas dream for healthcare that is not simply tied to your employment, that is not tied to whether or not you have an adequate benefits program to be able to pay for the critical medications for you and your family. Well, look, at the end of the day, whoever decided that healthcare should start from the neck down without having the pharmacare that we just spoke about, but also the dental care. The science is very clear about the direct connection between dental care, oral care, and overall health. The person out there, the worker, who hasn't seen a dentist in 10 years, the compounded impacts that has on their lives, whether it's dealing with abscess, situations with incredibly acute pain, or the loss of teeth. Something as simple as a job interview can create a tremendous amount of anxiety and a disproportionate disadvantage to working class people or people living without dental benefits. I don't believe we're living in a just society, a just democracy, when we're leaving incredibly vulnerable people out of basic care. And the other thing that's not spoken about enough, in my opinion, not just the eye care, which is also critically important, there's no doubt about that. You can imagine being in 3rd grade and not being able to see the chalkboard because you can't afford glasses or what have you. It impedes the reading and the learning. But also mental health, for people that have ongoing mental health problems or even acute crises, to be able to find somebody, a psychologist, is incredibly difficult. It almost has to push itself to the extreme crisis of somebody being a harm to themselves or somebody else before they get care. And then even when they do get admitted for care, within 72 hours, they're put back on the street without any kind of care plan in place. So, as New Democrats, we believe in a comprehensive healthcare system that is head to toe, that is the completion of the Tommy Douglas dream for universal public healthcare. I think we're in a very interesting time right now. We know, I think more than any other generation, that this form of capitalistic, predatory, extractionary economy does not work. We know that it leaves far too many people out of the prosperity. We know that the economic inequality in this country only continues to grow. There are 87 families who have more wealth than the bottom earning 12 million Canadians. And over about 4 years, they increased their wealth by close to $1 billion while everybody else watched their wages stagnate, while the cost of living for everything else rise. And we know that in past generations, the Red Scare was real in Canada. What we have as an opportunity in these upcoming years is a rebirth of the type of CCF, Tommy Douglas, democratic socialism that very clearly paints an alternative, compelling vision for the future of Canada. A lot is tied up in that word, and particularly on the left with the sectarian interpretations of what it means to be truly socialist and which policies, create radical politicians, and the sanctification of American politicians vis-a-vis what's happening here in Canada is completely without context. Because in the States, I would suggest that Bernie Sanders in our caucus would be moderate. I would suggest that there isn't anything really revolutionary for what he's saying in America, aside from maybe the free tuition, which I fully support, that would be out of place in a very moderate New Democratic conversation. But I feel like the name NDP has kind of lost its awareness, its value in the minds and hearts of Canadians. And it has meant different things to different people, and certainly there's been very legitimate critiques about the shift towards the center. I didn't feel like my values were reflected in the party until we came across this last election, where I think we offered one of the most progressive platforms in a generation. It's important to note that just because it didn't translate electorally in this last election doesn't mean that that's where we need to go as a country. So as an unabashed democratic socialist, I don't feel the need to stand up every day and use the word socialism as a shibboleth for the left. Because when I ask the average Canadian, is it fair that they work their entire career only to have their pensions stolen by greedy corporations at bankruptcy? It doesn't matter whether they voted conservative their whole life or whether they're an aspirational liberal. Every single person will say, no, that is not fair. When I ask if they believe that everybody should have a dignified and safe place to live, 9 out of 10 people would say yes. If we talk about, the pharmacare program that we had offered, the idea that polluters should pay and that we need a just transition for workers, Canadians fundamentally will accept that. But what we need to have is a better relationship with movements, and I'll put that out there. We certainly, I think, have lost our ways in past decades with movement-based organizing in the country. But we also need movements to think about, even though they're extra parliamentary, to think about where power and decisions are made inside parliaments. And to continue to organize door to door, street to street, neighborhood to neighborhood in between elections, to continue to be involved in riding associations. If you're watching this at home and you have a legitimate critique about the party, and you consider yourselves a New Democrat, because I recognize there's lots of party poopers who don't. There's lots of people who are happy to provide criticism, but they're not really interested in the party per se. They don't support the party in any way. They don't knock on doors. They don't go and organize in their communities. But if you are a New Democrat and you are interested in being a democratic socialist that will be involved and participate in the democracy of the party, then get involved in the riding associations. And if you sign up 1,000 members in any riding, it's a high likelihood you're going to get your candidate nominated. And it's only through that process. It's actually shocking for any Canadian in any party, by the way, not just ours, how few people determine the 4 or 5 names that are on a ballot, to determine the choices of any given riding association. That if you are an activist and you decide to be an organizer and go out and find incredible people who you share values with, I wouldn't be here on my own. Nobody handed this to me. We had an incredible community that was built around shared values in Hamilton Centre that started with me in 2013 and the lead up to 2014 with my municipal election, that got involved and stay involved, and it's only because of them. Working class people, racialized women, young folks, really young folks, high school kids, people, renters. The old adage that only homeowners vote is a complete myth. If there's anything that we can learn from the movements that are happening around the world, and not just the States, but around the world, the leftist movements that are really good, it's that they've stopped being led by the usual suspects or the people who always vote, the voters, their focus groups, their base, and they're starting to talk to people who are undecided, people who typically don't show up on a party roll. And I think that's where the real power is connecting movement-based leftist progressive organizing and organizers with great local riding associations which feed in to the democratic processes of the party. Weak riding associations, weak party. I would caution people from losing hope about what just happened in Super Tuesday. I think what we've seen is the Democratic Party coalesce around establishment, corporatist, centrist, leaders like Joe Biden. And I think that only speaks, it's a testament actually, to the power of the movement-based organizing that the Sanders campaign has inspired. I think what we're going to see is that in the years to come, the people who are following in that spirit that will continue to do that work, that have learned true grassroots organizing, distributed organizing versus the old school hierarchical models of political campaigning, that it works, that it's essential. And I think that the quote unquote powers to be are actually in their last death grasp of power, which is why candidates like Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn make people so nervous. But even on the, on the UK side, I think, again, there's lessons to learn about the discourse within political organizing, the purity politics, the idea of what it means to build big tents for people. And that if there are elements that are problematic within your organizing, be it anti-Semitic, be it anti-Black, which we're starting to see a lot of in the days after Super Tuesday with retrospectives on where the Black vote went, the African American vote went for Biden. I think it's something that the left needs to really think through how they bring people on side and on board. I'm certainly watching it, as I am leftist movements and coalitions around the world, just having spent a little bit of time on a interparliamentary mission to Mexico City and learning from the Morena government under Elmo and finding out how they balance all the different spectrums of the left within a governing party. I think in Canada, the challenge that we have is that so-called progressives, the language of progressive politic has been co-opted by liberals and watered down to render it almost empty and meaningless. That people believe, the average person who's not politically engaged and might not have read Das Kapital will believe that voting for Trudeau is the progressive choice. And so getting out of the false dichotomy, understanding where power is and movement-based organizing, understanding that we need to learn about how to do a distributed model, notwithstanding the fact that the entire generations preceding the 1980s are done with the kind of power and control of hierarchy. The internet has democratized information, communication, and organizing in ways that older generations just can't comprehend. That no longer is it a thing that younger people bring, a tremendous amount of talent and experience to the table, only to be told to go and stuff some envelopes until they pay their dues, or go put up signs, or do whatever. The true power structure analysis will reveal that we have to have an intergenerational approach. It does have to be intersectional. When I hear, so-called socialists dismissing the idea of identity politics, I put to them that all politics are identity politics. Your whiteness is an identity that is a politic. So when you dismiss that from racialized people, this understanding that marginalized groups, that all oppression is just class-based, is part of the problem. I think we have an opportunity to learn from that. I think we have an opportunity to reimagine what democratic socialist organizing looks like, what a social democracy looks like in the context of Canada, by bringing people in, by doing popular education, by showing solidarity. It is very clear the only way to overcome isolation of this capitalistic society is through solidarity. It is through local, community, neighborhood organizing that respects and acknowledges that everybody is coming to this from a different place. And it might not be precisely your exact place. And there is no waiting for Superman. There is no charismatic leader And this is the lessons to learn of both Bernie and Corbyn, who are going to solve all of our problems when they're put up against the products of the establishment. But the establishment will always show class solidarity and coalesce around people who will maintain the status quo and continue, the tremendous inequality in our country. Don't look for the cape, look for the clipboard. Get out there in your communities, organize with people that you might not 100% agree with, but you have shared values and principles on fundamental things. I'm going to encourage you out there, if you don't already support Canadian Dimension, to do that, because these media outlets are critical avenues of leftist organizing. If you're seeing this online, I'm going to ask you to share it with people, start a conversation. If you don't agree with me, that's okay. Say so in the comments. Let's have that dialogue. But I just want to thank the people who've put this together over the last decades, I guess. This is a long-standing publication for giving me this opportunity to talk to folks directly in their homes. We don't need mainstream media to cover us. We don't need corporate media to tell us what the byline and the story is. We can tell our own stories, and together we can create our own histories. Peace.